So one word that describes the world we live in today, what would it be?
Interconnected.
Connected.
Connected.
Changeable.
Change.
Constant change.
人就是变化.
Change.
Expect the unexpected. For the world, uncertain.
Exhilarating chaos.
Power shift.
It's no longer these big ethereal corporates that have the power. It's now the consumer. It's us. It's people.
Is experiential.
Experience economy. We as consumers, we judge our brands by the experiences that they deliver.
Transhumanism, an evolution of humanity, where instead of us seeing technology and humans as being separate, that we see that there is value in their convergence.
Exciting.
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 Exciting and challenging.
A magic.
Opportunity.
Full of possibilities. Dynamic.
Exponential.
It's fast-paced.
Impermanence. Whiplash, the kind of a feeling of dizziness.
Just crazy.
If this has a familiar ring, it's because it's the opening sequence to our global research documentary, The Incredible Curious Adventure. Gen Re has gathered a treasure trove of insights and new understanding by speaking to more than 100 insurance industry experts, thought leaders, consultants, innovators, futurists, digital specialists, and academics from around the world. We wanted to know how they saw the future and how this directed their focus and action. Although we've shared many of our discoveries in 2 documentaries, one South African and the other global, there is more. And the more bit is coming to you in a series of podcasts. Hello, I'm Ross Campbell, leading on digital at Gen Re and your host for this podcast series. Join me on an audio adventure that restrings insights from our global research into compelling considerations for the future, for discussion and exploration, with you, your team, your company, and our innovation partners. Episode 1 of 10.
Disruptive. That defines the era we live in.
The lead story that sets the scene for the insights to come is one of global disruption, not just within the life and health insurance sector, but across society as a whole. This global disruption is in fact a more significant story. As we shall hear, many of the ways we do things are under reconstruction and changing quite radically.
We are in the middle of an epoch shift. You know, whether you look at politics or immigration or socioeconomic factors or technology, everything is holding on to what was and everything is reaching for what could be simultaneously. And what I really feel is that in this moment of time in history, we're in this really tense point of transition.
It's the world that is fundamentally going through the biggest change ever, and the balance of power is moving, and it's really, we are witnessing history.
This is really important to note, that the disruption story is not simply an industry event, but a much larger global phenomenon. The 4th industrial revolution. When we understand this, we can begin to appreciate the enormity of the task of innovating for the future, not just at a company level, but at an industry level too.
Yeah, the topic of the recent World Economic Forum debate at Davos was the 4th industrial revolution. And that differentiates itself from the 3rd industrial revolution, which is really computers and it's business starting to use computers in the 1960s and so forth. But from the year 2000 onwards, we've just seen rapid changes in a variety of fields. In the physical space, like driverless cars, in the digital space, like the Internet of Things, and also in the biological space, like, for example, personalized medicine. And what's happening, these 3 different worlds are starting to converge, and it's all about disruptive changes in technology in all these spheres. And this world differentiates itself completely from the previous era where we lived in.
The knock-on effect of this revolution is making itself felt increasingly and even exponentially all over the world, even among the disruptors who now have to deal with the outfall of what they've enabled. Facebook, for example, is having to deal with this challenge right now.
Everyone is being disrupted. There's not one industry that I can think of right now that is not being profoundly impacted by the latest technological developments. And it's surprising in a way, right, for everyone. It's kind of at a speed and at a magnitude of impact that nobody really had imagined quite like that. And so there's the element of surprise, the element of fear, the element of potential and of excitement. And that makes for a really, really interesting mix.
In a digital world, disruption can come from anywhere. Technology will direct our lives and our well-being as we quietly hand over to the machine. This is the challenge technology is presenting to the insurance industry today, undermining legacy and even the very reason for our industry's existence.
One of the aspects of the digital revolution is the whole aspect of globalization of that, and how players don't necessarily need to be based in your market to compete with you in your market. But I suppose a factor of maybe the insurance industry being quite inwardly focused is we tend to look at our direct competitors rather than thinking about our competitors in a broader sense. So for that reason, we do need to be more globally connected, because the innovation that might actually disrupt our business could come from a market that we're not even currently looking at.
I mean, you think all the people that are operating in the digital space are operating globally. They're not operating locally anymore. It's Uber, Amazon, Netflix. They're all global players, really.
It happens all the time. Somebody come around with a new business idea, which is they disrupt the entire industry. Look at the internet business in China, in mainland China, right? So-called BAT, the Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Look at they are the huge banks now. I mean, they can suck up all kind of cash, right? So they pose threats to, they're doing online payments, e-payment, all this stuff, right? So people are so familiar with it. Years ago, you never dream of something like this. China is turning into a cashless society, you know. Amazing, right? So, but they are not really banks. I mean, from all angles, you know, they are only internet companies.
So if you look at, I think, the threat of robotics and the rise of the machines, everyone expected it to, and the most logical would have been your kind of manual, blue-collar worker type jobs. But what you're starting to see increasingly is that your lower level or even middle level white-collar jobs are completely at risk. Associated Press revealed that per quarter, they already publish 3,000 articles every quarter that is being written by an algorithm. So when you start looking at that and you start looking at empirically based industries, so auditing, insurance, even you go down to the law professions, legal secretaries, you go into healthcare, what's happening in your laboratories, all of that root work is going to be affected by machines. And we don't really think about that now, but it's a very real thing that's happening.
If you would have told anybody that there would be a digital coin created out of nothingness that would surpass the value of gold, nobody would have believed you. They would have laughed you off the stage. And yet today we're sitting in a reality where a Bitcoin is valued at greater than the price of an ounce of gold. And so we have to acknowledge that technology is moving our system forward faster than we can really embrace and understand.
Technology is showing that it can solve the trust issue better in most cases than brands and history and even regulators. So I think, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, it's really hard to do financial services for a startup because of regulation. I actually think the regulators themselves are going to be disrupted out of existence. And we can see an example of that with Uber. So the most interesting thing to me with Uber is, you know, there's lots of interesting things about Uber, but the most interesting thing to me was that the taxi industry was a highly regulated industry, and yet we all had really bad experiences quite often with taxis. Uber went around the regulation, but they had a simple rating system. So every time you get out of the cab, you rate the driver and the driver rates you. That overnight gave a trust mechanism that was 10 times better than a highly regulated trust mechanism.
It's no wonder that these powerful forces are challenging and disrupting long-standing business models. That's one thing, but consider this too. How customers meet providers is changing. Today, people are informed and empowered with different expectations. It's time to recognize the current industry disorientation, to recognize how we are challenged and left wanting, and create new readiness for a very different future.
People's foundations are shaken everywhere, and because of that unsettled nature of the world,
people find it difficult to find direction. The world has always been uncertain, but to some degree you could extrapolate the past into the future to give you some kind of guidance of the kind of direction that the world can develop into. But that has changed in the nature of the uncertainty, where past conventions don't hold any clues of the direction that the future might develop. It's not clear where we're going. So you actually have to have a number of lines in the water to be able to respond appropriately.
I think the challenge for all of us, insurers and reinsurers alike, is the fundamental building blocks of insurance and by extension reinsurance are changing. Where we might have designed our risk management frameworks and our products around a 10 or 20-year view of the world, I mean, those days, if they're not gone, they're going to be gone very soon.
If you're underwriting people on the basis they've got a medical condition, but actually in 5 years' time they might not have, you really need to be able to respond to those kind of changes. So I think the industry has got to get better at engaging with the industries that are creating the change for it.
We're just at the start, which is this idea of the quantified self. Everything about us is going to be highly measured, and the things that we'll be able to do with that are, limitless, and especially in the insurance space. When you get closer and closer to having perfect risk knowledge, that really changes how you can think about those things.
In many ways now, customers are in the driving seat. They know more about themselves. And literally, if they take genetic tests, they can know an awful lot about themselves. So they have an information advantage over the insurance companies, which was never the case before. Consumers are going to expect to have much more personalised, tailored solutions that are fair and fairly priced.
What fundamentally has to happen is for the customer to move directly into the value chain. I am the platform. The customer is becoming the platform.
So global disruption is changing the playing field in ways we could have never imagined. Yet it does present real opportunity for a new frame within which to create and compete. In this sense, it's an uncomfortable wake-up call to an industry with an increasingly commoditized offering. Feels like time to embrace the forces of disruption and to ride the rising wave of opportunity on offer.
So one of the things with digital technologies is that we tend to overestimate the change that's going to happen in the very short term and underestimate the change that's going to happen in the very long term. But somewhere in between there is the sense that instead of aiming for an immediate change, we need to build a fitness for change. As an organization, we need to understand that innovation isn't something that we do, but it's a capability that we practice.
Yes, innovation as a capability must become the new normal, and digital solutions must quickly become part of business as usual. This is core to Gen Re's digital strategy and focus. We really want to talk to you about digital. Call your local Gen Re office to make that happen, or get in touch with me direct. And please join me in the next podcast to hear more insights.